Support for the podcast comes from Play at Home Physical and Occupational Therapy. Play at Home Physical Therapy strives to make life easier for your family by providing quality pediatric, physical, and occupational therapy for your children in the comfort of your own home. Dr. Stephanie Lynn is a board-certified doctor of physical therapy as well as owner and lead physical therapist at Play at Home, which provides home-based physical therapy services to children ages birth to 5 years in the greater Philadelphia area. The therapists at Play at Home have a broad range of experience and are skilled in treating many conditions common in children, including torticollis, plagiocephaly, developmental delay, hypotonia, cerebral palsy, autism spectrum disorder, sensory processing disorder, genetic disorders, neurologic disorders, feeding disorders, neuromuscular disorders, premature birth, fine motor delay, visual motor delay, and toe walking. Play at Home PT is passionate about helping children achieve their full potential through play-based therapeutic activities and supporting their families every step of the way. Learn more at playathomeft.com. Hello, and welcome back to Parenting Stuff I Wish I Knew Sooner and Want You to Know Now. I'm your host, Erica Desper, founder of the Center for Confident Parenting, and a mom who seemed to learn everything I needed to know the hard way. Today, I'm joined by Nikki Seaman, a pediatric speech language pathologist at Owls Therapy, where she evaluates and treats a variety of speech and language disorders while prioritizing collaboration with families to implement and adapt home exercise programs. Nikki's also mom to one 3-year-old boy. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I am excited. So first, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, how you came to speech language pathology. Why do you love it? All those good things.
So I've been a speech language pathologist for 7 years now. And I like to say that I am immersed in the world of toddlerhood, both at home and at work.
For real. Those are my favorite guests. You've got to be in the trenches with the rest of us.
Yes. So I like to tell parents, I do have some experience myself having a child at home and being able to witness some of these milestones and this developmental process, firsthand. But getting into speech language pathology, I grew up and I had a family member who had some communication difficulties, and I really just wanted to see him thrive. I wanted to find a way for him to use his voice. And just seeing him go through, different tests and different methods and different things that, it took a while to kind of figure out what worked and what didn't for him. And so just as I went through school and as I got older, went through college, I, decided, I said, I want to dive into a career where I can help people find their own voices. And that was just from the start, growing up to now, that's still my mission. I really enjoy doing that overall. So that's how I personally got into the field.
Yeah, that's great. So can you just give us an overview of how language and vocabulary typically develop before we get into, challenges of development?
Yes. So basically when a child is born, like people think, oh, well, what are their first words? What are their first words going to be, right? So we focus so much on those vocalizations and we focus so much on just what is coming out of their mouth. And there's actually a few things before that we are part of language development that we focus on as well. So we talk about joint engagement. We talk about repetition of gestures. So we talk about reciprocating a smile or a clap or just putting your hands up in the air. And then you start to hear some of those, the cooing, the gurgling, all those little sounds, those sweet, sweet baby sounds. And then after that, you start hearing that babbling, you get some more increased engagement and then some back and forth engagement. And you start to then hear words around that 12-month mark. Some earlier, some later, but around that 12-month mark. And the biggest thing is when you're focusing on child's development, just making sure that you're looking at the milestones and the averages and making sure that you're seeing what, say, an average child is doing. Yes, we want to make sure our child is hitting the milestones because parents always hear that milestone buzzword, but we also don't want to lose track of what, the average child is doing at that age, just so we can see where they would compare to peers. Because when we as speech language pathologists are looking at that, we're comparing them to the average child in that age.
Right.
So at about 12 months, we would expect a child to have at least one word, but the average would be 5.
Okay.
And then as we get into 18 months, we have 10 words, but the average is 50.
Okay.
And then as you move on to 2 years, you're at about 300 or more words, and you're starting to combine them into phrases. So it's becoming more functional. You're not just labeling many things, you're actually combining those to use them very functionally and intentionally. And then last, the 36-month or like the 3-year range, at least 250 words, and the average is 1,000 or more. And you're starting to combine them into sentences and phrases and everything. It's becoming more complex. And one thing you will notice is, as I was talking about that, the gap between those increases.
I was going to ask a follow-up question about that, but go ahead. Say what you're going to say first.
Yes. So just noticing that gap is increasing. And that is because children begin to learn about 10 new words a day, starting at about 18 months, all the way up until like the beginning of elementary school and into first grade. They learn so many new words per day.
Which, so the hat I wear mainly, well, I have a lot of hats, is sleep challenges. And there is an 18-month, regression that we support parents through or let parents know is maybe coming soon. And I don't think we call it the right thing. Regressions aren't really regressions. They're developmental progressions. But the reason for the 18-month one, what I always tell family is they'll say their sleep just fell apart overnight. They're waking up too early in the morning and they're babbling in their crib. Or when I put them down for a nap, they're taking forever to fall asleep. And I say, hey, are they acquiring a lot of new words lately? And they go, oh my gosh, yes, like tons of new words every day. And I go, boom, that's what that is.
Yes. There's so many different changes that occur too. You might see more behaviors, all of the things that come with language development and just development in general. Toddlerhood is a wild journey, I will say.
It is.
And then even, again, at home and then with being at work as well, you also see kids adapt and change in different ways from session to session. Sometimes you have to change your plan of attack, even if you had a kid for a little while and you think you know them. They can challenge you a little bit, or they can provide you with a new perspective that maybe you didn't know you knew.
Yeah, awesome. All right. So that's how it, would generally sort of develop. And you and I were talking before we hit record, but I'll back up a little bit. We know that one milestone kind of lays the foundation for the next one. So for example, a child needs to learn to stand before they can learn to walk. You can't really skip that part. So if a child isn't doing what the average child is doing, maybe they're a little delayed in their vocabulary and language development, how then might that impact their ability to move on to the next thing, which is reading skills?
So just like we talked about the words building on top of one another in order to form, phrases and sentences, very similarly, being able to apply those language concepts when you're learning to read, right? So you're learning to apply those words in a context that may be less familiar and very novel as you read different types of books or you're trying to read a sentence. Also, the development of difficulty with connecting words on a page. So being able to understand that there's different parts of speech also. So there are words that are nouns, right? Person, place, or thing. There are words that are adjectives that describe things. And there are words that are verbs that are actions. So if you didn't have that development a little bit early where you were kind of going through and figuring out how can I apply this in a context where I'm playing, how then do you apply that in a context where you're reading and it's kind of a more structured, seated task that requires more focus and analytical nature? Does that make sense?
Okay, interesting. Yeah, for sure. So clearly early literacy is really important.
Yes.
So can we go over some things that parents can look for to know that they might need to seek an evaluation or some treatment? And I guess, so now I can do my follow-up to your earlier comment, like if we want to see a minimum of this, but the average child is doing that, and there's this gap, which you said widens as they get older, where should we start to, I don't want to say worry, but maybe get curious? Is it if they're doing less than the average? Is it only if they're doing less than the minimum? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So also, just to note, there are several skills that precede just reading and writing and just simple reading of a word or even letter recognition. When kids are really little and you're thinking about stories that have rhymes or you're singing songs, those are early literacy skills. Being able to engage a child with all of that content and with that rhythmic, those sounds, those movements, keeping that flow and that fluency, that's very important for any kind of reading that they may do later as well, as they can keep that pattern where they have to read through a sentence, stop, read through a sentence, stop, and kind of understanding the flow of, say, a story or a novel, or just simple words on a page if they're younger and they're just learning to read. You kind of have to have that foundational skill of understanding rhythm and flow. And that comes when children are little. They're engaged in music and dance and stomping and clapping a lot, right, in preschool. So it starts very early. So in addition to those, which is just, again, rhyming, syllable recognition, so clapping, print awareness as well. So simply holding a book and understanding that here's the cover, here's the spine, I open it, and I know that I turn the pages, and I know I start on the top left and I move right across, and knowing that you don't always go all the way across. Sometimes you read these pages first and this is just like, right? So I mean, there may be some books that you go all the way across because it has a really big word across the page, but oftentimes we do read left page, then right page, right? So just having that established in their foundational skills, then when they pick up a book, they're already familiar with that. Because obviously,
it's amazing when you break it down. You're like, how does anyone ever get all of this, right? There's just so many parts to it.
Exactly. And the thing is, like, people don't realize too, when I tell parents, I'm like, you can do this at home. You're probably already doing this. And they're like, well, yeah, we do talk about how you start here when you read. And I'm like, right. So you can do it too. So just bringing parents awareness to what they are doing well, I think, is also very important, because I
think a lot of the things we do naturally, like I was saying to you before, I'd be bored. I have one kid and I'd be home alone with him and I would just like narrate my day. But now I know that is probably one of the reasons why he got such a great vocabulary.
Right. Yes, exactly. So like, as much as you can talk to your kid, talk. But then with that as well, just modeling narrative formulation. So showing a child that, let's tell this story. What happened at school today? And kind of tell that story. Today we went to the firehouse on a field trip and we saw a fire truck and a fire hose, and the fireman was wearing a helmet, and we heard the loud alarm. And then after the firehouse, we got on the bus and we rode back to school, kind of giving them more of a sequence to practice, if that makes sense. And then along with that, after you have all of those skills kind of established, you start to develop some letter recognition, right? So as you're getting a little bit older into those preschool years where you're actually doing some more schooling and doing some more content-based learning, you have more of that letter recognition, that sound recognition, putting those sounds like, with P says P, P says D, just making sure that they're exposed to all of those things. And once you've had exposure to all of that and you're doing all of those things, there are some red flags to look for. So if your child has difficulty learning and remembering names of those sounds after you've constantly been, exposing them to it, that's one sign that maybe you should seek out an evaluation to make sure that your child is, well, number one, we would always ask for an audiologist to make sure that they are actually hearing the sound and hearing well. Right. Yes. So just because that hearing acuity, you want to make sure it's not, auditory processing is different than auditory acuity. So we want to make sure that they are actually hearing well. Right. And then we would look into other things later if the hearing was okay.
Gotcha. And before you go too far into the red flags, you said once they are exposed to this and then they can't seem to remember it, use it. So are we talking about like we spend one day exposing, like how long would you say like P is puh, and then expect your kiddo to sort of adopt that before you'd go like, they don't seem to be picking it up?
Yeah. So I would say after, weeks of doing it, or you're seeing it in both contexts of, say, they're in preschool and you're doing it at home. Right. And you're doing it consistently and you notice they're not picking it up. And again, this is when they're, around 3 to 4, 4 to 5 years old. So they're in that later preschool years. They're not like, early in daycare, they don't know their letters by the time they're 3. That's, that's okay. But as they get into that those pre-kindergarten years, and especially between that 4 and 5 year age range, we need to make sure that they are really starting to kind of at least have a foundation of
Okay.
sound.
But
and
it's
letter
good for
formation.
parents to know. We're not talking about
Yes.
like in 3 days they need to be able to
Right.
tell you.
No.
P is pa. I mean, maybe they
Right.
can, but you
Maybe.
might be
Yes.
thinking like weeks versus days.
Yes, exactly. Like this is after like many exposures, constant exposures. You're practicing this for a
Yes.
while. Yeah, and it could
Okay,
even
good.
be some months for some kids. But just making sure that if they are in that age range, that's more important than the amount of exposure. Because even kids now, you could expose them. Like my son, you could expose him from the time he was 2 till now, and he still may not fully,
Right.
recognize those sounds.
Okay. Got
So
it.
yeah, because we have to make sure they're developmentally appropriate as well.
Right.
But yes, and then also, higher auditory comprehension than reading comprehension. So this is for those older kids that if they're listening to a story and they're able to answer any question that you give them, they know the setting, they know the characters, they know everything about that story. They could tell it back to you exactly as it was. You want to make sure that they then can read the story and answer questions in a similar way. Because
interesting.
Because you often see that kids who have difficulty with decoding and reading overall have a better auditory comprehension because they've been so reliant on that because they have not been able to read for content and to understand.
So these are kids that can tell you more about the story when you've read it to them versus when they have to read it to themselves or to you.
That's correct.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So that's a flag to look for. That is a new one to me. So that's a really good takeaway. Everybody pay attention to that one.
Yes. And then reading errors also, this is going back to that context idea. So reading errors that make no connection to the letters on the page. So they might read something completely different than would make sense in the sentence and that the letters don't make any sense. So for example, if you saw the word says like children and they read it as dog. So they read it like
that. I would probably notice.
Right, exactly. So just like noticing that they're like the letters, it does not even a word that starts with the same letter or that has the same ending sound. There's no similarities really between the words. They're just kind of guessing at that point.
That's what I was going to ask. Are they guessing from context, from photos, that they're not actually decoding the letters in the word in front of their eyes?
Right. And sometimes they may guess from context, but oftentimes they do guess just in general because when they are reading, they're not getting the full meaning behind the sentence because they're not fully comprehending it. So oftentimes even guessing from context is also difficult.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And that goes back to that vocabulary foundation too of like, could that be a verb or could that be a noun? Because in case they give you a word that maybe doesn't fit that part of speech that even should be in the sentence, that also makes it a little bit, that makes it more of a red flag of, ooh, well, that word doesn't really make any sense because those letters aren't in that word, but also that's a noun and there's supposed to be a verb.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Okay. So on the topic of red flags, I'm thinking of a question I want to ask, but I don't want to derail you from the flags. Did you get through the ones you wanted to do? Okay.
Yeah. There's a few more, but we can talk about those in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't you finish those and then I'll ask my next question. What else are we looking out for?
Okay, so just a couple more. So just talking about recognizing rhyming patterns. So being able to go back and forth and say a word. So if I say pip, you would say
pop. Oh, I want to rhyme. Lip. I just failed, folks. I just failed my speech language evaluation. I totally forgot what we were doing.
It's like, wait a minute. What was she asking me to do? Yeah.
Maybe I think I have a processing problem. It's called being really tired.
Oh, hey, parenthood, all the things.
Right.
This is a parenthood podcast.
And lip. My final answer is lip.
Okay, love it. That is correct. Yes. $1 million to you. Yes. So we'd have pip, we'd have lip, we'd have dip, we'd have sip. Right. So being able to go back and forth in a rhyming task, and then also recognizing rhyming words on a page. So even during a read aloud, so even though we talk about that auditory comprehension being better, recognizing those sounds may be difficult. So even if you're reading aloud to them, and I read a rhyming passage, recognizing, okay, which words did you hear that rhyme? Let's read it over again. Can you hear it? That you may notice that is very difficult for them as well.
Okay. Got it.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then the last one is just understanding that words can be broken down into smaller units. So making sure that the word like dog, like we talked about before, it's d, a, g, right? So, and understanding that those little units have meaning and they have a sound, and that when they bring them all together, it creates this picture in your mind of, oh, a dog. It's an animal with 4 legs, and often people have them as pets. It barks. So just connecting the idea of reading as sounds that come together, which then creates that vocabulary image that we talked about earlier.
Right. It's so interesting because, you know, we call this field speech language, but we're not focusing so much on this. Like when I think of speech, I think of articulation and like what sounds can they give back out, but we're really focusing more today on like what's going in, I think, and what they're getting out of it. So it is just a really interesting field of study. Okay. So we kind of know what to look for. The question I didn't prep you for that I thought of while you were talking. So let's say a parent is listening and going like, okay, yeah, maybe my kid can't do that yet. And they are within this age group that we're talking about. What are we, you know, that can feel scary for a parent, but we're not talking about anything necessarily as big that you're going to have to deal with. Sometimes it is maybe an articulation issue. I know that dyslexia is one of the things that you and OWLs specialize in. Is that like, could these flags indicate that your child has dyslexia, or what else might it be indicating? You mentioned an auditory. We do want to have their hearing checked. What else could it be?
So overall, just when you're looking at these signs, you often notice that children who have articulation difficulties early, which is why focusing with a speech language pathologist is super important. They often have difficulties reading later. So it may not be just strictly because that articulation is causing deficits in reading, but they can often also be a sign that you're going to have difficulty with reading. Does that make sense? Because your interpretation of the sound and your ability to produce them also has an impact on the way you interpret them on paper. Right?
Yep.
So then as you continue to explore and you have these other, you have these red flags, right? You're like, okay, well, my child is having difficulty with rhyming. Okay. My child is having difficulty with understanding the different parts of a word. But what could it be? If it's not dyslexia, if it's not, just articulation, like what can all of these factors mean? Is that kind of what you're
like what would the end result be, I guess?
Yeah. So oftentimes with the vocabulary aspect of that, we try to see if children have any difficulty just processing language and with that vocabulary aspect. So as children get older and they kind of, say these kids that are in the 3rd and 4th grade age range, right? So they're getting a little bit older. You're noticing that they're doing okay with reading. They're doing, they may have had a little bit of difficulty with some rhyming early. They may have had some difficulty with sounding out words, but they're starting to pick it up. They're doing really well. But you're still noticing as they get a little bit older, their comprehension starts to be they're not really answering the question. They're not really giving the core of the story elements. They're not really understanding what the problem is in the story and what's the solution or the sequence of events. Those things, we start to look more at language processing, which focuses on that vocabulary foundation and kind of figuring out, okay, what are they able to take away from the story and what are they missing? And that relates back to speech language pathology in that you're focused on the language component there versus the speech. So we talk about how articulation can result in some difficulties with decoding, right? But then the language component also can impact those skills that kind of form that foundation for reading to learn as you hit that level, 3rd and 4th, 5th grade, where you're really not learning to decode anymore, but you have to apply those concepts that you've internalized from practicing for so long.
Got it. So it sounds like the benefit to working with someone who knows all of this is that you really know how to dig into like what is the challenge this kiddo is having, and then what's the root cause of the challenge, which a parent really, like, even when I walk away from this recording today, I'm not going to be able to figure any of this out, right? So fortunately, we have SLPs that can help us. And then here's another thing I did not prep you for. My apologies. let's say someone sees you and they determine, yes, my child has whatever, a comprehension challenge. What is that? I know as a parent, it can feel overwhelming to think like, great, here's one more thing we need to work on, and we're going to need, appointments for years. What is it often looking like? Like, are there always things that you can do to improve these areas? Is it a commitment to a very long process? Can some things be improved quickly and easily?
I think overall, like as a parent and as a person, we always want to have like something that, what is the solution? We want the solution because we know that if we do these things, this is going to happen, right? We add A, B, and C, and we get this magical result.
Right.
that is everything will be solved, right?
Right. We want to wave a magic wand.
Right. Absolutely. Why would we not?
And
especially
if it could be quick and cheap, that's a bonus.
Yes, exactly. But that's a factor to definitely talk about, right? So being able to invest both time and money into a service, you want to make sure that the results, come
Right.
out to your liking, right? So
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is to understand that like the teamwork component of all of this is super important. So having collaboration amongst all the professionals in your child's life. So whether that be a parent, a grandparent, anybody that is within their general home life, along with people that are in their school, and then the therapist as well, just everybody that can collaborate and really communicate with one another on the best possible way to implement the strategies that are being practiced in therapy is going to get you the best result.
Yeah.
But I think just thinking like, is this always going to be a thing? It's really difficult to predict an outcome because every child is different. There are several children that, you teach them one thing, even with articulation, right? You teach them something one time, they pick it up instantly.
Pick it up.
Other
Yep.
kids, it takes a little bit longer for them to get those patterns figured out. And then once they do, they're done as well. But I think it's hard because we want to see the light at the end of the tunnel from the beginning. And oftentimes we kind of have to take that journey first and really trust the process. And just know that when you are putting your child in, especially our hands at Owl Therapy, we take the time to make sure that we are listening to all the professionals that are involved in the child's life. We oftentimes will schedule collaborative sessions with them just to make sure that we are up to date. And it's just one of those things that I think the commitment on all sides will provide the best result, even if from the beginning, you're a little bit nervous about the process.
Yeah, for sure. I just think it's nice to know, it sometimes can be, oh, we just need to tweak this one thing. Certainly not always, and we can't predict, but I know every time I find out something new that my son needs treatment or therapy for, I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go again. But some things, when someone says to me like, hey, we're going to do X number of sessions and then we're going to see where we stand, I'm like, that's great. I love like the finite. Just tell me what the plan is here.
Right, exactly. And I think the best thing too, is to know that like they're on your side, right?
Yeah.
So knowing that, like, because even when you call us and you call up and you say, hey, I'm not really even sure if my child needs services, but I have these questions and these concerns. Is there any information you can provide to me? And when you call us, you actually speak to a speech language pathologist. So we don't just have like somebody answering our phones and scheduling. So we will be able to provide you with some insight and even to say, hey, that kind of looks like it could go either way. Why don't you try these strategies for the next like few weeks or a month? And then I'll give you a call back and we'll evaluate then if we really think that, you need services, and we'll get you on the schedule. But it's one of those things where instead of just setting like, okay, well, in 3 months we're going to be done, and then being disappointed when we're not done because we didn't hit that mark, really being open to the process and making sure that you're committing to it and everybody in the process is committed to it to give you the best possible path forward.
Yeah. Well, and I think another thing that you and Owls does that maybe helps progress along is that you come to the child in their natural home.
Yes.
Environment. Can you speak to that a little bit? What do you think is the benefit of doing that? And I know you're a little biased, but
oh, I love it. I love everything about it. No, I think being in a child's home, it's the place they feel the most safe, right? So it's one of those places where they feel the most free to express themselves. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get them to express themselves in whatever way that means to them, right? So I love being able to come into a house with a few things of my own, but then also using the toys that they use every day. It provides an opportunity for parents to observe you, and watch what you do with the toys that are here. So then they can then take them and do the same thing during the week. And
In
they can
between.
practice.
Yeah. So
And
great. Not to mention way more convenient for parents, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. So, I mean, in both of our locations in mainline PA and in Northern Virginia, there's some traffic.
Right.
So yes. So having to get to a clinic for a therapy appointment that, you're like, oh man, kid gets out of school at 3:05, my appointment's at 3:20. I don't know if I'm going to make it.
It's tough. And I have one of those slow to warm kids. Well, he's not much of a kid
Yes.
anymore, but like the kind of kid you take to the mommy and me, class that you pay for that only lasts 45 minutes. And he would like cling at the back until minute 46.
Yeah.
And then everyone's putting on their coats and shoes and he's like, I'm ready. Right?
Right.
And then the next week, it's not like we start farther ahead. We start over.
Right.
So had he needed something like this, I could really see the benefit of like, hey, we're just going to stay in our home environment. There's really no warming up except warming up to the person. And then when you see them every week, you are probably starting further ahead. So I think that's awesome that a lot of providers are moving in that direction. Harder for you, easier for us. And we thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Here's another spur of the moment question. Let's say it's a delay. It's not a true disability, although you can correct me if that doesn't even matter. If it's just a delay, do you find that when kids catch up, like, is it resolved completely? You could never tell that they had the deficit. They just kind of move forward, or like, what does that look like? If they're behind and we get them caught up, are they just on even par then with the average kiddo?
So oftentimes that depends on, again, the foundational issue that started everything, right? So oftentimes for articulation, you may see a child that had an expressive language delay when they were younger, say when they were 18 months old. And then later, say they're doing a great job, they're really starting to express themselves. And later, when they turn like 4, 5, you might start to see those articulation errors hang on a little bit longer. So instead of them having like an expressive language delay, they then had some articulation errors that need to be corrected, where they still need to visit with the speech pathologist and get those corrected. So that is something to consider, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, that expressive language delay carried throughout. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's it. Because delays can, make parents really nervous and then guilty. Like, what did I not do? What did I do wrong? Whatever you're thinking. Yes. So I think it is nice to know that I see this a lot with physical delays, that like once they catch up, you can compare average peers and you're never going to know which one needed the therapy. But that's also good, to your point, to know that it could kind of re-emerge or still be present and present a different challenge down the road. And maybe we just need to like tighten things up and come back.
Right. Yes. And it's one of those things too that you often too don't see the things that led up to it until you actually know. So some of those kids that I was talking about with those application of skills as they get older, they may have had, like, again, a little difficulty here and there kind of decoding or reading, but they did pretty well overall. And then they start to apply and you're like, oh, did they have some of these things all along and we didn't know? So sometimes you just don't realize those like kind of precursor or red flags that weren't necessarily the focus as they were younger, because they were doing fine, right? So then sometimes parents are like, well, why didn't I notice it earlier? And I was like, well, you didn't have all the information, right? So that's not anybody's fault that you didn't have the information, but now you have this information. Look what we can do with it. There's so many services we can provide to be able to like help them overcome these challenges.
No more, do more, more, do better, whatever you want things to be.
But yes, no, and that's one of those things that just to your point of saying like, are they going to hang on forever and whatnot? I mean, we always say like early intervention always has the best results. So anything that you could do to dive in early is going to be the best possible result in the end.
Yes.
For your child,
and I'm going to ask you to expand on that in a minute, but I thought of another unplanned question. If it turns out to be a hearing acuity issue, so I didn't learn to say my words properly because I wasn't hearing things properly. Clearly, they would need their hearing addressed. Are they still going to need some support in articulation afterwards? Like, does it end up being a multidisciplinary thing at that point?
Yes, so it would depend on the child in particular. But yes, just because we would at least want to consult with an SLP if they had some hearing difficulties, just because we don't know what they were missing. So oftentimes when we don't know what they were missing, we need to evaluate and kind of see, okay, well, we know that these certain sounds develop at this time that they weren't hearing, but we didn't know. But what's interesting about that is oftentimes you notice that the hearing issue stems from when kids are little, and they kind of get evaluated on their hearing pretty early in life, right? So before any of those specific phonemes develop, right?
Right.
So oftentimes it's more so the language component. Like what did the child not hear and was not able to kind of understand that they're now not able to apply when they're starting to talk. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Since
Exactly.
they didn't get to hear a lot in their environment.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So to go back to what you just said, thank you for that. Correct me with what you said. Early intervention yields the best result in the big picture, or something, something along those lines.
Yeah.
I think what you mean, based on other guests I've had on the show, is that earlier we step in to address something, like it's going to give us the least timeline. So if parents are worried about like, how long is this going to take? How many sessions are we going to need? That sort of thing.
Right.
I think that's what you're trying to say, but can you say it in your own better words as I stumble over mine?
Yeah. Yes. So like we were talking about before, my big phrase, don't wait, evaluate.
Yes. Love it.
Don't wait, evaluate. Go for it as early as possible. It's better to know that you went and you either got the diagnosis you needed, or that you got clarification that maybe there wasn't as many things going on as you would have thought.
Yeah, or what to keep an eye on to be sure, like the come back later thing.
Exactly. So you have more information, like we talked about. Know more, do more, right? Isn't that what you said?
Yeah.
So exactly. I mean, I think it's just one of those things that if you can go and get some insight as early as possible and then get therapy started if it's necessary, you are going to be so much better off as your child gets older and they already have an established foundation of strategies and practice, so that they then can apply those and just make steady progress and then continue on, versus, again, finding it later because you just didn't go evaluate it, even though you were kind of thinking about it. It's better just to get some insight. And like I said, if you wanted just some insight from an SLP, feel free to call us, because you can just, talk it out with our client intake coordinator. She's wonderful. So, and more than willing to chat with you.
Excuse me, all the providers I know are more than willing to make sure and wanting to make sure that the support is the right fit and it's the right time to do it, and they see enough going on that, it makes sense. So I don't think we as parents have to feel like, well, I need to decide whether this is totally necessary or not. There has to be a problem to bring to this person. You can just bring a curiosity, a concern, and say, like, here's what I'm seeing. What does that mean to you? I remember early on, I have a friend who is a speech language pathologist, although she works with the older population after they have had a stroke or something similar. And I would be messaging her all the time. Like, he's saying this sound really funny. Like, what do I need to, because sometimes too much, right? Like, I do think it's possible to be too on top of all of this. So I was panicking, and she was like, that sound doesn't even, like, we're not even worried about that sound coming out properly yet, see where it stands at X age. But I felt so much better of like, all right, take it off my mental plate. This is just a kid developing. Typically it's a sound that comes later. So that was really, helpful for me. So yes, if we start early and they do need support, it will be more effective in a shorter amount of time with, I think, the least amount of effort for our kiddo, right? If you've tried to learn something new as an older person, and I consider myself older at this point, it's like, I don't know how many times I've tried to learn to play the guitar, but I'm calling it quits for a while because I know it would have been easier if I learned it earlier on. So that's one reason we don't want to wait. And then to go back to the beginning of this recording, you also helped us to understand that, like, one thing lays the foundation for the next. So again, the earlier we catch it, maybe it's only affected this one piece of development. We're getting ahead of it affecting all the next things in the chain. So that's definitely important to think about. So I get that, and you get that. Unfortunately, not all other people in our lives may understand that. So if a parent has a concern and they bring it to the daycare provider, the teacher, the pediatrician, whoever it is, and that person isn't so hip to this, they might say, they're so young, just wait and see. There's a really wide range of normal. They're probably just on the slower side of, the normal range. And those things can be true. What would you say to that parent that you maybe haven't said yet?
aside from don't wait, evaluate.
Yes. I just want to let you say it one more time.
I would say that parent, I mean, I just think as a parent myself, I think that, you know, I would do the same. Like for my child, I would go even as a professional having, you know, knowing these things in this field, I would still go even if Andrew had some difficulties with his speech. I would say, okay, like, let's just go see what happens. If he needed some help with, you know, his movement, I might say, okay, well, let's just go get PT. Just because I have seen what happens if people do wait. And having to catch kids with certain articulation errors or reading difficulties or language difficulties later. And again, like you said, it's a lot harder to correct when the child is older rather than just going and seeing and checking it out and getting a professional opinion who actually has training in
and that's the difference.
field.
I think that's the point I wanted to get to is like, yeah, pediatricians are awesome, but I know many of them and they tell me all the time, like, let's take breastfeeding as an example. They get maybe 1 hour or less of information training about how breastfeeding works in medical school, right? And same with all of these areas. You can't be an expert in all of these things. We can hear just today how complicated this is and intricate and involved and interconnected, all those things. So just don't, I think if your gut is pinging and someone in a position of, you know, authority, like a pediatrician, someone we kind of look to for advice, isn't feeling the same concern, just find out what your options are. You can be the squeaky wheel and say, like, really, I would just feel better if you give me a referral for this and I can take it off my plate. Or there are private providers, you know, like Owls, you just go. Anyone can reach out to early intervention. So definitely, you know, there are options. I could regale our audience with countless stories. I probably couldn't even count them all on one hand of times where I was told something similar. He's too young, wait and see, whatever. And now here we are in our teen years, finally getting a slew of diagnoses. And I am just literally kicking myself for not being squeakier earlier. But again, no more, do more.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay. So I mentioned at the outset, you are a mom yourself and you are in the early stages. Your son is just 3 years old. So for this next and last question, you can answer with your professional hat on, with your parenting hat on only, or maybe you want to do one reply with each hat.
Okay.
But what is one thing, you know, the whole premise of this show is, you know, let's not find these things out later when it's not really as helpful or when we're kicking ourselves. We want parents to hear things as early in their journey as possible and just at least put it on their radar. So aside from the things you've already mentioned, what's one thing you've learned on your own journey that you really want parents and caregivers to hear and know today?
My biggest thing that I've learned just in life in general, but also can apply to my practice as a speech pathologist, is less is more. Oftentimes today, I feel like we're so overwhelmed with all the things that are thrown in our face, whether it's technology or whether it's food from a toddler, depending on where you are in that journey, or a toy during a wooden block, exactly. All of these things. When you have less kind of in your view, whether it's, you know, clutter or whether it's in your mind, it keeps opportunities open for creativity. So I like to tell parents, just try to keep it as simple as possible. When it's playing, people will try to market to you, oh, this great toy, look, it helped my child talk. You know, you have your voice, you have your ability to interact with your child that is just as valuable as any toy that anybody can sell you.
That's an awesome point, especially because, you know, we all have different means and it can feel like, I can't buy all the things, you know, for my kid, I can't buy all those talking toys.
Right.
You can still give them this really, really rich, not just language experience, but experiences in general that don't require all the stuff.
Right, exactly. And I tell parents too, I say, you know, sometimes the best sessions are when the plan completely goes out the window, right? Because a child was having a tough day or the environment had to change because they were getting some work done in their house, whatever it may be. But it allows for authenticity to emerge. And authenticity in the ability to connect with people is the most important thing. It's just being able to be authentic and be able to create that environment for the child where they can feel safe and comfortable to express themselves, that you get the most out of them and their communication. So I think overall, if you can just be as flexible as possible, even in the stressful times,
Right.
as difficult
Easier
as that
said
may
than
be.
done.
Yes, as difficult as that may be. But just embracing that it's not always going to go as planned, and that's okay, because that allows for the best opportunities. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I was definitely not a less is more parent when it was my turn to do this. I bought like and I think it was driven by the fact that my son had a really short attention span and had no idea how to play independently. Very low frustration tolerance. So if he decided he was like done with a toy that he couldn't quite figure out, he was just done with that thing completely. And I didn't know that all of that was tied to issues we were going to discover later. But I've seen, now that I'm more experienced, just to piggyback on what you're saying, I've noticed that if there's like 2 or 3 toys out versus all of the toys, most children will engage more with those items, spend more time with those items, and be more curious than just like moving, from one thing to the next. So that's a slightly different version of the tip that you were sharing. But yeah, you don't have to buy all the things. And even if you buy all the things, because maybe that's your style, you don't have to have them all accessible at the same time. I learned really late that I should keep hidden baskets or bins of toys so that the novelty factor could, okay, we've seen these things all week, let's put them away, and I don't have to shop and spend money because I already have another bin to bring back out. So here we are, saving folks money while we do our parenting.
Yes, that toy rotation concept is taken off, where people talk about that all the time. So I'm like, yes. I like it.
And I can't function well as a mom or a human being when there is a lot of visual clutter. So I was really making day-to-day life more stressful for myself because there was just stuff all over the place. And I was like, I got to put away this stuff. So there's a lot of benefits to that less is more concept. And that is not a tip that anyone has shared yet. So thank you for that. That was great. Nikki, thank you so much for joining me. There's so much we could talk about with speech language development. So I'm sure I'll have you back again, but we'll leave it there for today. Listeners, watchers, thanks for joining. I will be back soon with more stuff that I and others wish that we knew sooner and want you to know now. In the meantime, I'll leave you with my list of stuff I've learned the hardest way. Your to-do list will always be there, so put yourself on it. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Schedule ways to refill yours every day. And there's no way to be a perfect parent. There are countless ways to be a good one. So let's aim for that. Until next time, thanks everyone.